That's a VR headset of today. And this is a VR headset of the 20th century. Or at least some kind of. The Viewmaster. A viewer for three-dimensional images. What the pictures look like? Well, let's take a look. This is a view from above the famous Acapulco Bay. There's something special about these pictures. You don't necessarily have to watch this video in 3D. I think the images are pretty unique even in 2D. But when you do, the 3D effect virtually moves you to another place. But not only that, most of the pictures are from the 50s and 60s. And you can see that most of the time as well. So it's also a kind of time traveling. And this form of time travel, let's call it non-fictional time travel, is what this video and this channel are about. The Viewmaster system was introduced in 1939 and sold throughout the entire 20th century. Technically, the Viewmaster is actually quite simple. The recordings are located on such discs, officially called Viewmaster reels. There are 14 single images on them. 2 images belong together, one for the right eye, one for the left eye. So 7 stereoscopic images are stored on one disc. Through the left lens, you see only the left image for the left eye, and through the right lens only the right one. This is what makes a difference between the Viewmaster and 3D glasses. In the case of 3D glasses, both images are projected on the same screen and only the glasses separate the 2 images from each other again. From a technical point of view, the Viewmaster is a bit similar to VR headsets, as I already said in the beginning, because also in case of VR headsets, the image generation for the 2 eyes is separated from each other. And because of the 2 lenses and the general design, I think that the Viewmaster looks a bit like a VR headset. By the way, don't be surprised if you can't see any 3D effect even with 3D glasses. I kept only the scans of the Viewmaster recordings in 3D, this makes the effect even more special. And one more thing, originally the image format is a square. The pictures I have shown so far were cropped for 16:9 by me, but more about that later. I think even some younger people have seen one of these devices before. It is usually associated with children's toys, which is not surprising. Since the mid-60s, the focus of the available discs have shifted more and more towards entertainment, film and television, and within this category more and more towards children's entertainment. Discs for children were also very common before that, for example this one. But especially in the 50s and 60s, something else seems to have dominated. I would call it a kind of travel experience. Considering that back then almost no one could afford to travel to faraway countries, this seems to be a good description. The 3D effect makes the experience much more immersive than with normal photography. And that's the point where I have to talk about the picture format again. As I said, the format is actually a square, with rounded corners. I've cropped the picture so far to 16:9. Personally, I think it's a shame when movies are cropped for TV broadcasts, for example. But in case of the Viewmaster, I decided to do this because the immersive 3D effect is much stronger when the whole screen is used. I choose images that are suitable for cropping to 16:9. But with many pictures, this is not possible. Often the pictures are very well composed for exactly this square format, like this picture. It would be a shame to cut that down to 16:9. Pictures that I absolutely want to show you, but which are not suitable for 16:9, therefore I leave in the original format. So don't be surprised if the picture format changes from time to time. It's not that easy to create scans of the Viewmaster discs. I don't have a film scanner, and furthermore it would be difficult to get this unusual film format into such a scanner. So I invented something else. What about shining through the pictures and photographing them with a reflex camera and a macro lens? Okay, I don't have a macro lens, but an inversion ring turns even a prime lens into an acceptable macro lens. I built something to shine through the discs and fixed them at the same time. One side is designed as a door to change the disc easily. Foam pads make sure that the discs always have the same distance to the camera, cannot slip, and the disc can still be turned easily. To shine through the pictures, I used indirect light, which falls through a ground glass screen into the box. The camera is connected to a monitor to control focus and exposure. Afterwards, I resharpened and removed dust and other dirt as good as possible. Maybe one of you has some Viewmaster discs at home and wants to try to digitize them himself. My construction is not difficult to build, but taking pictures and digital editing need a steady hand and most of all a lot of time. But enough of that, now let's take a look at those pictures. As I said before, most pictures reflect their age. I'm not talking about colors or dust or anything like that. It is much more what the pictures show directly that makes their time of production very clear. Many times you see cars from the late 40s, 50s and 60s, like in this picture from 1957. That's a nice picture. Beautiful clouds. And of course the Volkswagen T1. Very clear this becomes on shots of cities. Take this one for example. The café of the famous hotel Kempinski on Kurfürstendamm in West Berlin. The people's clothes and the chairs of the café have a strong 1950s look. I have discovered something very different but also typical of the time on a 3-disc set. This is Disney's Tomorrowland. And the next picture, which is actually what it's about, has something funny, but in a strange way. A woman with her child drives a kind of bumper car. You don't think that's funny? Well, look at the title of the picture. That's what was called political correctness back then? But back to the actual topic. I think there's something kind of exotic about the aesthetic of the 50s and 60s. But in fact, there are also a lot of pictures that actually show exotic scenes. Like this picture from Kampala, the capital of Uganda. The title says Aga Khan Mosque, Kibuli, but that doesn't seem to be right because the mosque is called Kibuli Mosque. But let's move on to the next picture. Aztec dancers in the ancient city of Teotihuacan in Mexico. A very colorful picture. On the sleeves of the Viewmaster discs, there's always written something like full color pictures. And this picture is not the only one, which obviously represents this term very literally. Unfortunately, this picture is quite blurred and that is not a result of my scan. The pictures on this Viewmaster disc are somehow all not very sharp, which is a pity because I think it's a pretty good picture from the Natal National Park in South Africa. Here's my personal favorite of my Viewmaster collection. It's called Fishermen Sell Their Catch on the Spot. I would call it exotic, mainly because it seems to show something that happens away from tourist hotspots. Somehow more unspoiled. So far, all of these pictures were exotic for me as well. The next one is less exotic for me, but I could imagine that non-Europeans would see it quite differently. It's a typical Bavarian panorama from Germany. I'm German. Oh, that must be a surprise for you. And even though you hardly ever see these traditional clothes today, it still looks a bit familiar to me. And yes, somehow such recordings are a bit cheesy too. Do you think so? Well, what do you think of this picture? Okay, Swiss cheese is still there, but in fact, many Viewmaster shots show things and places that don't exist anymore. And by that I don't just mean cars, clothes and such things that don't disappear but only change. This is a view of Würzburg, one of my favorite cities. There's no year mentioned on the disk, but the picture must be from the 1950s. If I zoom in on this section, you can see that there's actually still a ruin from the Second World War. And here you can see that even around the church towers there are still scaffolds. That's quite remarkable, because the Viewmaster pictures mainly show a kind of sunny side of life. Any negative aspects are mostly faded out. But especially the pictures from Germany sometimes contain something like that. Same on this shot from Dresden. Another Berlin shot. This is the famous Alexanderplatz, which belonged to East Berlin at that time. It also looks very different today. You can see the logo HO on the left building. That stands for Handelsorganisation, in English Trading Organization. HO was a kind of GDR brand for department stores, restaurants and hotels. I've got a couple of Viewmaster discs with private shots my grandpa took. They date back to the mid-1960s. Again, there are still things to see that no longer exist in this form today. 2 milk churns. Of course, they are still known today, but more from television commercials. Nowadays, most people don't really use them anymore. Same with this one. These are sheaves. That's the name of a hand-tied bundle of grain. As you can see, several of these sheaves were then put together in groups, so-called Stucks, in German Diemen, to dry the grain. Today, machines make this method obsolete. You rarely see sheaves on a mountain summer range where you cannot work with machines because of the extreme slope. But now, once again, getting out of Germany and going to parts of the world which are far away from me too. There, too, some things have changed a lot. There are some Viewmaster discs that show natives, like this shot from South Africa of the disc Natives of Zululand. The picture is from 1950. This one, also from South Africa, from the record Natives of the Transvaal, is actually from 1948. Sure, even today there are still people who live in this traditional way. But we should not forget that the habitat has been significantly reduced in the 20th century. And this is not only true for Africa. Here's a picture of the disc Highland Indians of Guatemala, also from 1948. Now I'd like to make something like a hard cut. In contrast to all previous recordings, this one looks almost ordinary. It is from one of 6 San Francisco discs from 1976. I personally love the aesthetics of the 70s. Somehow everything seems modern and old-fashioned at the same time. The cars are not as round as before, but the angular design looks pretty old school today. And on these 6 discs are some really nice night shots. I find night shots fascinating as well. Personally, I like to walk through cities in the evening with a camera. Such images look a little like neon signs because the biggest part of the image is black or at least very dark, and the lights give an extreme, strongly shining contrast to it. Until now, I have shown the past with the recordings. This is inevitable because all the recordings are at least 45 years old. But to finish, I want to show something else which is not only about the past. This image shows the Mendenhall Glacier in Alaska and is from 1950. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a recent image on the internet to compare it directly with. Almost all the pictures are taken from the right side of the lake instead of the left side as on this Viewmaster picture. Therefore, their perspectives are so different that a direct comparison is impossible. But at least I found this picture. I think you can see in the comparison that the edges of the glacier have decreased a bit. But that could only be my impression. The glaciers of Alaska are much less affected by the climatic conditions there than most other glaciers on Earth. Nevertheless, the Mendenhall Glacier has also shrunk. That's the Grinnell Glacier from the National Glacier Park in the United States. The photo is from 1948. I found a picture from 2008 with a quite similar perspective. If you lay the pictures over each other, you can see quite clearly how much the glacier has shrunk. Here is a picture from the German Alps, the Schneefernerhaus on the top of the Zugspitze. At that time, 1955, this was a hotel and the terrace was used by the guests for sunbathing. Today, this is a climate and environmental research station. How climate change affects the Alps can be seen, for example, in this photo from Switzerland. The picture is from the 1960s. On the left in the background, you can see the Rhone Glacier. In comparison with the picture from 2013, you can definitely see a decrease. According to forecasts, it may have disappeared completely by the end of this century. Not impressive enough? Well, how about this? This picture is from the 60s, I think, and is called Aerial View of the Glockner Range. The glacier is called Pasterze and is the biggest in Austria. The comparison with the picture from 2013 is actually shocking. There's hardly anything left, I almost want to say. In the Viewmaster image you can see a lake below the glacier. This is the Margaritze Reservoir and I have another picture of it. You can clearly see how the Pasterze Glacier ends just above the lake. The Margaritze Reservoir is a glacier lake. What does it look like today? Well, let's have a look. Yes, the glacier is no longer there. Now in its place is just another lake. You can't even see the glacier from this perspective because it decreased that much. Sure, I have seen comparison pictures of glaciers before, but to stand in 3D virtually in front of a glacier that no longer exists in this form is something else. From this point of view, the Viewmaster shots not only tell about the past, but also about our future. This is not meant to be a pessimistic conclusion to this video. Rather, I think that it is always worthwhile to look back if you want to move the future in a more positive direction. But now enough of my philosophical megalomania. I hope you enjoyed this little journey through time with the Viewmaster. That would be great, let me know. And if you would like to do more of such non-fictional time travel, you should definitely follow this channel. The next one is coming soon. Then, without the Viewmaster, but back into the past again, and this time in 360° VR.